Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Kelly, I came across a deal a couple weeks ago on a duplex. The numbers looked great, but when I looked into it a little bit further, it kind of didn't make sense anymore because as the owner, I was going to have to pay the utilities and that would have killed the cash flow. So I passed on the deal, but you think I may have made a mistake there, right?
Well, I think that you don't have to just assume that you as the owner have to pay for those utilities. That's exactly what submetering can do, is you can transfer those costs onto your residents.
The problem with submetering is that not every utility company is going to let you do it. And if they do, it can be pretty expensive. On the podcast today, Kelly is going to share with us a pretty unique way to submeter that doesn't involve the utility company and is really very inexpensive. Joining us on the show today from Seattle is Kelly Koontz. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Kelly. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
Kelly, the idea of submetering sounds interesting, but I have the impression that it's fairly expensive.
Well, I think the impression you have, Dan, is when you're thinking about the cost that the utility companies want to charge when they are adding meters and then setting up brand new accounts to bill your residents. But that's not true when we're talking about submetering, where you're in charge of installing the equipment and overseeing the billing process.
All right. Yeah. So let me talk to you about this. So tell me big picture how this works, how your company submeters without having to have the water company or the electric company install separate meters for each unit.
Yeah, happy to share with you about that, Dan. So just as we said, you have a property that is getting a utility bill for the entire property, but you've got multiple residents that are living there, whether that's a commercial tenant or their apartments or condos. And what we can do is, number one, add the hardware to the property so that every individual unit is metered, whether that's electricity or water or gas. And then we'll add to that hardware a reading system so that reads are accessed remotely, pushed up to the internet. No one has to go on site to actually read meters anymore. And then when that data is available, now we can create a utility bill for each resident, each tenant, based on their actual usage.
Okay, so let me make sure I got this straight here. So the water comes into the building, and there's just one connection coming in the building. And then you put like say if it was a 4-unit building, you would put basically 4 meters within the building that's measuring how much each tenant is using?
That's exactly right, Dan.
Okay.
We would put for instance, on a water meter, we'd put a water meter on the supply line into each unit. And that water meter would be a utility grade, super accurate meter, but it's not that expensive. And we would add some wireless reading technology to it. And then that meter can be installed anywhere, whether it's in the crawl space or in a closet or up near the hot water heater. No one ever has to really access it after it's installed.
Is that a pretty complicated install? Like, is that something I could do, or would I need a plumber or an electrician to do it?
Well, every situation is a little different, but you would, if you're comfortable with plumbing and if your application is such that the you can get to the water lines and they're easily accessible, and you're comfortable with working with plumbing, you could do it. You can always call a plumber, but and this is not rocket science for plumbers. They can install these with less than an hour per unit.
And then I guess like once a month or on a certain schedule, that information then gets transmitted back to your office.
Yeah, it actually is constantly up on the internet, and you as the owner or the manager have access to that data. You get daily reads. And then once a month, our office would look at it, and then we would take a 30-day usage period and calculate the bills based on the actual cost that the utility is charging the property.
Okay, so yeah, that seems to make a lot of sense. That as a landlord, like this is just an expense that you can put back on your tenants, so that you're not having to absorb that cost. Like, am I missing something? Like this just seems kind of like a no-brainer.
Well, we think that, Dan, 30 years ago, the cost of water was incidental. And when you're building a building, you didn't really worry about covering that in your monthly rents. But those days are long gone. Water is precious. It's getting more expensive every year. And if you've got residents that essentially feel that the water is free, they're not conserving it either. So the other really important feature about submetering, whereby the resident is now paying for what they actually use, is the overall usage of the utility at the property is going to drop because people are going to naturally start conserving more.
Right. Now, how does your company get paid? Like, do you mark up the utilities, or is this an expense that I would pay or an expense that the tenant pays?
Yeah, great question. We have two parts of our business. The first part is to help the building owner to get that equipment installed. So we're going to sell some equipment, and we're going to work real closely with the owner to maybe hire a local plumber or electrician to get that installed. And we have some markup on that hardware and installation. And then once it's in place, the owner has the choice of accessing that data themselves and just doing the billing on their own, or if they'd like us to do that monthly billing service to their residents, we can do that too. And the way we get paid for that is we'll add a very small service fee on the bill for the billing services. And almost everywhere in the US, that's allowed and appropriate. It's usually a $4 or $5 fee at most. And so the residents actually pay for our monthly billing service. It's not coming out of the manager or owner's pocket.
Okay, so I would get the bill still. Like, so the bill if we're talking the water bill would come to me. I would pay that, and then the tenants then would reimburse me. Did they pay me directly, or do they send the money to you guys and then your company would pay me?
You have the option, Dan. If you would like to have the money go straight to you, we encourage that. We'll send the bill to the resident, and it'll have right on the bill, remit your payment to the owner's address. Or if you don't want to deal with that accounting, we can set it up where they send the money to our office, and then once a month we remit to the property what we've received from the residents.
So then the only cost to me would be getting the equipment, like the one-time charge to set up the equipment. And then monthly, it's correct. The tenant that would pay.
You're exactly right. Just the costs for the equipment. Depending on the size of your property, we do have a monthly minimum for our billing, but even that is relatively small. And most of the time, it's a free service if you have enough units to cover our monthly fee.
Now, are there any laws? Because I think I've heard before, you can't mark up utilities. So like putting that service charge on there, like that's totally legal.
It sure is. And it's one really important aspect of our industry, Dan. I'm glad you asked about it. Every place, every state, even cities and jurisdictions within states can have either no regulations at all on this, or they can have quite a bit of regulation. So that's one thing that you get when you contact us. We have a whole database throughout the country that keeps very close tabs on what the regulations are. Our standard policy is to generally comply with the most strict ones out there, but we're always going to keep you out of trouble with that. I think one of the most important understandings about this is not a way to make money. The laws allow you to recover your costs, but not make money on it. So we're going to charge the residents to the tenth of a penny, the exact same rate that the utility is charging the property.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. So you have the amount of water they've used or the amount of electricity that they've used, but how do you figure out what you're going to bill the tenants? Like, how do you know the actual water rate or electric rate?
That's a really important part of our process. We're going to either have you as the manager send us that utility bill on a monthly basis, or we're going to audit it on a regular basis from the utility. So we're not taking guesses. We go straight to the source of the utility on what those costs are and make sure that you're not in trouble by overcharging.
Wow. I mean, this just seems to make so much sense. Almost seems too good to be true. Is there any downside?
Oh, we have we've been doing this. Our industry's been doing this for 25 years. And of course, it was the big apartment buildings that kind of caught onto this fast. And I think it's now finally an understanding that if I've got a 6-unit or a 4-plex, this makes sense even for that group as well. You are, as an owner, going to be managing those receipts of the money, or and maybe a little extra one-time monthly event with us to coordinate the bills and whatnot. But we've really found that we make that as easy as possible for you. If you've got property management software that you're doing your accounting for, in most cases, we can even synchronize and integrate with that. Sometimes residents, when they're used to getting utilities for free, you're making a change where they're now paying for it. That can have a little bit of concerns on their part, but we really work well with our clients to make sure that they educate them well. And really the key there is letting them know that they're really paying for it already, whether it's in the monthly rent or whatever, but now they actually have control over it, and they're not having to pay for maybe what their neighbor is wasting. So those are all the things we can do to make this process go well.
One thing that I'm just wondering here, and I don't know if this is possible or if you guys have thought of this, but with you constantly monitoring the water usage, if there was all of a sudden like a water leak or a pipe burst, is there any way for the landlord to be notified that all of a sudden there's a huge spike in usage?
Such a good question. I mean, the good news now that's been a real fun trend in our industry is that the electronics and the technology is getting sophisticated enough, because we're taking a read on how much water is being used on a every couple hour basis, that we can tell. The systems now have algorithms that can find when, say, that toilet flapper chain is hung and the water's been running for 24 hours. And yes, our systems now will send a text or an email alert that says, you need to go check out unit 4. The water's been running for more than a day, and it's very accurate. And everybody wins on that, Dan. The resident wins because they're not going to have a crazy high bill 45 days from now. The overall bill to the property is going to be less. It's a win-win there. And that's a really neat advance that we've brought with our industry.
So talk to me, give me some numbers. Like, so what would this cost to get set up?
Well, let's use that 4-plex I've mentioned as an example. If you've got an apartment building, and let's just use water as an example, and you wanted to add those 4 water meters to each individual unit, you're going to have in the hardware cost of the meter and the electronics. It all told, it's going to be somewhere around $2,500 to $3,000 of hardware costs. Now we have to get the meters installed. And so we're going to have a local plumber do that. If you're not comfortable, that can be as low as $75 or $100 a unit to a few hundred, depending on what the requirement is in the specific property. But it's not a lot. And I think if you analyze it, and we'll help you do that, if you start charging for that utility, in almost all cases, the return on investment to cover the hardware and installation cost is usually less than 12 months.
Wow. Okay. So 2,500 to 3,000. That's for the hypothetical 4-unit building, that's the total cost. That's not per unit.
No, that's not per unit.
Okay.
And that is exactly right. That's minus the installation, but even with the installation, you're not going to be more than $3,500.
Wow. I mean, that really seems to make a lot of sense. Now, what about getting power? Like, how does the unit get power?
Great question. So we'll stick with that water meter. Yeah, because these meters are going to go in a closet, in a crawl space. There's not power there. They don't need it. The meters themselves and the transceiver that sends the signal are battery powered. They use a lithium battery that has a 7-year life. It's replaceable. So about every 7 years, you've got to put a $4 battery in it, but there is no need to actually wire anything to the water or gas meters.
And then as far as transmitting the data back to your office, is that over Wi-Fi, or like, how does that work?
Great question. So one place on the property, we're going to put the main gateway where the transmitters from each unit talk to it. And that gateway needs either a hardwired Ethernet connection to the internet. It can use Wi-Fi. And if you don't have that available, it's very common, say with a fourplex, we even have a cellular option. So there's no monthly costs for if you're doing it with Wi-Fi or Ethernet. And if it's cellular, we have a monthly fee that's $35 to $40 a month for the cellular.
I think this can make a lot of sense if you have a property that's maybe not cash flowing that great and the utilities are killing your profit, or maybe you're looking at a deal and the numbers would make a lot more sense if you didn't have to pay the utilities. I think this can really save your property. If you want to find out more, if you want to talk to Kelly and see if this might make sense for you, I've got Kelly's information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 471. I'd like to thank Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group for sponsoring today's episode. If you're looking to buy a rental property, whether you're just getting started or you want to add to your portfolio, reach out to Chaley. She's a nationwide lender. She's got tons of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you in your situation. If you want to find out more or you want to talk to Chaley personally, you can reach out to her at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Make sure you follow the show. I put out a new episode every single Tuesday. And if you're following the show, you'll get notified every time I put out an episode. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.